Logic is the language of philosophy. If one wants to better understand what philosophers are saying, an understanding of the basics of logic would be helpful. In fact, it's necessary. Here I'm going to go over 4 basic terms relevant to the understanding of logic. These are the terms argument, proposition, validity, and soundness. Let's look at the term argument first. An argument is a set of 2 or more propositions, one of which, called the conclusion, is being claimed to follow from the truth of the others, which are called the premises. So what does this mean? Let me give you an example. Here we have an argument. The argument contains 3 propositions. I'll talk about propositions in a bit. Think of them as sentences. One of these propositions, the conclusion, is said to follow from the truth of the other 2, which are the premises. Another way of saying the same thing is that the premises prove the conclusion. But there can be bad arguments. You can have arguments that have false premises, or arguments where even if the premises are true, they wouldn't prove the conclusion. I'll have more to say on that later. Here are 2 more examples. These arguments are relevant to the issue of abortion. Each argument offers a set of premises in support of its conclusion. Each argument contains sub-arguments embedded within them. Are these good arguments? Well, that depends. To determine if either of these arguments are any good, one needs to determine if all of the premises are true, and if the conclusion follows from the premises. An argument, as has been said, is a set of propositions. So, it's going to be useful to know what a proposition is. A proposition is a sentence. It has a subject and a verb, and it can be either true or false. Propositions generally aim to describe the universe. If they describe the universe correctly, then they're true. Otherwise, they're false. We're surrounded by propositions. Some propositions are true and others are false. I don't know what day it is as you're viewing this video. The proposition today is Tuesday may be true, or it may be false. The proposition that the earth is flat happens to be false. But no proposition can be both true and false. It may sometimes seem as if the same proposition can be true or false, but this is because we have to pay attention to the context. If I say, I'm recording this video, at least at this moment it's true. Tomorrow the sentence, I'm recording this video, will be false. However, another proposition, I recorded this video yesterday, will be true tomorrow, even though it's false today. So what we have so far is that an argument is made up of propositions, and propositions are sentences that are either true or false. The next concept we need to look at is validity. This is by far the most important concept that we're going to be discussing in this presentation. It can also be a bit confusing, so let me see if I can make it clear. To say that an argument is valid is to say that it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. That's a start. Let me explain what this means with an example. Let's say that a murder took place in Denver on February 24th. The nature of the murder is one in which whoever committed the murder had to have been in Denver on February 24th. And let's say you have a suspect, suspect number 1. Suspect number 1 hated the victim, threatened to kill the victim, and has prior convictions for violent assault. However, you have irrefutable evidence that suspect number 1 was on a boat on the Atlantic Ocean with a large crew and very little privacy on February 24th. We could say that he was there filming a movie, and they were there for 3 days. There's no way he could have gotten off the boat and to Denver to have committed the murder. You have to let him go, right? He's no longer a suspect. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Here's the thing. There are certain ways in which propositions can be organized that guarantee the validity of an argument. Philosophers recognize these forms, and they even give them names. Here's a few examples. Modus tollens. This is the form of argument that I used in my example of the Denver murder. It has this form. If the first proposition, in this case the proposition that suspect 1 committed the murder is true, this implies that a second proposition, the proposition that suspect 1 was in Denver on February 24th, must also be true. However, in our example, the second proposition turns out to be false. In this case, the suspect was not in Denver on February 24th. We must conclude that suspect 1 could not have committed the murder. We can strike suspect 1 off of our list of suspects. It is not possible for both premises to be true and the conclusion that suspect 1 did not commit the murder to be false. This type of argument, the modus tollens argument, is extremely important in scientific research. Scientists come up with a hypothesis. To test the hypothesis, they notice that the hypothesis has certain implications or makes certain predictions. So they create an experiment. The purpose of the experiment is to determine if those implications or predictions are in fact true. Now, if the experiment fails, the scientists know that there must have been something wrong with the original hypothesis. The hypothesis might need some revision, or perhaps it gets thrown out entirely. Now let's look at another argument form, a form that's given the name modus ponens. To illustrate how this form works, let's assume that our hypothetical detective is now at the scene of a burglary. Valuable materials have been taken out of a company storeroom. The detective reasons that, if there's no sign of forced entry, and the door is automatically closed and locked when the room is empty, then somebody with security access must have been in the room when the items were taken. An investigation of the crime scene shows no signs of forced entry. So the detective concludes somebody with security access must have been in the room when the items were taken. Again, there's no way for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. Here's another example of modus ponens. A sports team finds itself in a position where the following premises are true. Premise number 1, if we win this game, then we'll be in the playoffs. Premise number 2, we've just won this game. From this, we have to accept the conclusion that, therefore, we're in the playoffs. The truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. A third type of argument form that I want to briefly mention is called a disjunctive syllogism. It can also be known as the process of elimination, or the Sherlock Holmes principle. You may have heard this quote attributed to Sherlock Holmes. Whenever you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Either way, you're probably familiar with the practice. People use it whenever they want to troubleshoot some problem, like why the TV doesn't work, or to find a bug in some computer code. We have a list of possible options, and we eliminate those possibilities one at a time. As each option gets eliminated, assuming that we haven't made a mistake in eliminating them, we conclude that whatever options remain, however improbable, must be the answer. You use these 3 types of reasoning every day. There's nothing new here. The only thing that's new is making them explicit and giving them names. The one term we still have to explain is the term soundness. If you understand validity, then soundness is easy. A sound argument is just a valid argument with true premises. Recall that a valid argument is one where if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. So, if a valid argument actually has true premises, then the conclusion must be true. The conclusion has been proved. You're done. This also means that if somebody comes to you claiming to have proved that their conclusion is true using an argument of this type, there's 2 ways you can challenge them. You can either prove that at least one of their premises is false, or you can prove that the form of the argument that they're using doesn't guarantee the truth of the conclusion from the truth of the premises. Either option proves that the argument is unsound. Philosophers love sound arguments, but sometimes they're pretty hard to come by. Still, the gold standard in a philosophical discussion is to try to come up with sound arguments defending your positions. This means coming up with a set of propositions, where the conclusion is being supported by its premises, that has valid argument structure, a structure where the truth of the premise guarantees the truth of the conclusion, and where the premises are in fact true. An argument is a set of two or more propositions where the conclusion is said to follow from the premises. A proposition can be thought of as a sentence. It can be true or false, but not both, at least not at the same time. An argument is valid if it has one of the forms that guarantees that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. We've looked at three forms: modus tollens, modus ponens, and disjunctive syllogism. These three are extremely important and very common, but they're not the only forms that exist. To learn more about this subject, take a course in propositional logic. And a sound argument is one which is valid and which has true premises, which means the conclusion must be true. The conclusion has been proved. Now, this isn't a course in logic, and this is just a very small part of the study of logic. However, if you read any philosophy, it's useful to understand that the author is trying to come up with something like a sound argument. The author will present you with a conclusion and then provide premises that aim to support that conclusion. Some will even provide you with arguments in the form that I've used in these examples, with premises and conclusions explicitly identified. If not, you can usually identify them with careful reading. Then, once you understand the author's argument, you can take steps to assess that argument.